Hi, this is Pastor Tim. Welcome to this week's study guide. We are in Romans chapter 9. The sermon title was Promise Fulfilled. What a fascinating chapter this is. A difficult chapter. A lot of pastors don't like to preach this, but it's necessary, and it introduces an incredible, well, it doesn't introduce, but it reinforces an incredible doctrine that we'll talk about here in a moment. And so let's dig right into our study guide tonight. We got some great questions, and let's just find out what they are. Number one, what does the fact that Israel rejected God say about God? Here we see that Paul is really upset. He's sad because his home people, his nation, Israel, who were the people of God, had rejected God. They rejected the Messiah that they so longed for, and it really bothered him. And the question that he anticipates from people is God's plan thwarted? Is he able to carry out his plan? If this was his chosen people, then what? He answers that, and he says, listen, God's always made his plan come to pass. There's a difference between the people that God chose and the people that God didn't choose. And the people that God chose weren't just descendants of Abraham, it was always the children of promise. Now, we're going to discuss what that means later, but the children of promise is key. Remember, he chose Isaac. He chose Jacob, not Esau. And so we see here that some were chosen and some were not. The children of promise were always the one that God carried about and intended to and always made come to pass the fact that he was going to redeem them. And so Israel is not, the true Israel is not the descendants of Abraham. The true Israel are the children of promise. That's very key. Question number two, what does Israel's rejection of God say about Israel? We continue that with who are the children of the flesh and give an example. And also who are the children of promise, give an example. Well, here we see that the true Israel, as we mentioned earlier in question number one, is not the descendants of Abraham. True Israel are those who have been circumcised of the heart. These are those who have always pursued God by faith, the ones that God had chosen, the ones that he had set apart. And so we know that Abraham had two sons, one by Hagar and one by his wife. The one by Hagar was not the one that was chosen, Ishmael, but the one that was chosen is Isaac. And so just because they were descendants of Abraham did not mean that they were the children of promise. Ishmael was not, Isaac was. Isaac had two sons, twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob was chosen by God, Esau was not. And so we see that again, it is not the descendants of Abraham or Isaac, but it is those whom God has chosen. This is very key. Throughout the history, we think that God saw Israel as Abraham's descendants. And to some extent that's true, but to God's eyes, the true Israel was always the ones that he had chosen. The remnant, the ones who were faithful to him, the ones that he had chosen, and the ones that he enabled to follow him. That's vital. And so the children of the flesh would be people like Ishmael, people like Esau. But the children of promise would be Isaac, Jacob. Number three, what vital doctrine does Romans 9 teach us? Very important. Romans 9 really teaches us and reinforces the doctrine of election. This is very challenging for us. At the same time, Paul doesn't shy away from it. God elects whom he may save. Now, this is vital. I really explained this in the sermon, but let me reinforce it. This is not the doctrine of what's just. God's justice demands that we're all damned, that we're all going to hell. But God's mercy, his election, means that he's going to save some. So if we want justice, then we all have to go to hell. But if we want election, that means we thank God that he's chosen some, many, countless many, to be redeemed. And so it's not whether or not that's fair. What's fair for all is that we are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. What is merciful is that God chooses to select some, and I believe that availability goes out to many so that we can be saved. And so that is the doctrine of election. Number 4, why do we struggle with the doctrine of election? Well, let's be honest. We try to make God in our image, and we think, what would we do? What does seem fair to us? What seems right to us? And we cannot begin to comprehend the mind of God. And so we want a God that treats everybody fair. We want a God that saves us regardless, or we want a God who accepts us regardless. We don't think a God should send anybody to hell. And here's the bottom line. Our God is more knowledgeable than we are. Our God is far surpassing our limited ability to think or understand or reason. And so his ways are higher than our ways. We know this, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That was a decision made in the garden, and it's a decision each one of us make in rebelling against God. And because of that, we all deserve death. Here, though, God is revealed as a God who elects. He has chosen some of us to be saved, and for that, we ought to be extremely, extremely thankful. Finally, why should we rejoice in the doctrine of election? As I mentioned earlier, we should be extremely thankful and grateful because God has elected us who know him. It should make us feel awesome to know that he chose to adopt us, that we were orphans, that we are out of his presence, we were out of his future. And he came, he sent his son to die on the cross for our sins, and he elected to save us. And I'm thankful today that he's elected you, if you're a Christian, that he's elected me, because that is a supreme act of love and a supreme act of mercy. Heavy subject today, but I pray that you would understand and rejoice in the fact that God chose you. That's what Paul's trying to get across, and I hope that he's gotten that across to you. God loved you, he chose you, and because, listen to me very carefully, because your salvation is based upon his choice of you, you don't have to worry about messing it up. Yes, we know that some form or fashion we have a will that we must express, but in the end, none of us would ever come to know God unless he called us. And because of that, we can have eternal security. God bless.